What's going on, guys? It's going to be our Sum of Your Markets week 88. Then, as always, we're going to get into our stock and options watch list after that. Let's get started with SPY. So SPY had a pretty strong week last week. You had a kind of a weak open, but a strong close. Very nice day on Thursday, and then a strong gap up on Friday as well. So we were able to fill the upper gap that was right around 442. And then we also have a gap right around here at 447. This is the gap that's still open above us. And then we have a gap right here at 442 that actually was created to the downside. And then we have this one right here. So these are all the local gaps that we still have, the 447, 442, and then 435. So moving forward next week, we really just want to be paying attention to these levels. If we can push up and fill the 447 gap, if we can stay above that level, then it looks pretty good to push higher, right? If it can't stay above 447, then it's most likely going to come down to 442, and then you could even break down to 435. Now, I will say that this was the best case scenario, right? Playing out the inverse head and shoulders and then breaking out from that level. The only problem is, on the breakout, we gapped up twice and we did not fill those gaps. So if we look at all the local gaps on SPY, pretty much all of them are filled. Okay, so putting in these gaps and not filling them immediately is a little scary. So I wouldn't be overly bullish next week unless we can maintain above 447 consistently. But any kind of weakness around 447, 446, should worry you a little bit. And you could easily pull back to retest 442. Now, retesting 435 is going to be a little hard because the buyers were so strong on Thursday and Friday. So I wouldn't call for a failure down to 435 just yet. But I would be very wary of that 442 level. Okay. Basically the same story on Qs. We had a couple gap ups here. So we had this one right here at 366.50, and then we had this one right here at basically 360. We don't have any gaps above us that are not filled. So that's a little different from SPY. Another thing that's a little different is we're still below the 50-day and we're still below the monthly VWAP. So if we go back to SPY, you can see we're back above the monthly VWAPs, which are these horizontal lines here, and then we are back above the 50. But on Qs, we're still a little weak, okay? Momentum is climbing short term, but the trend momentum has not shifted bullish just yet. If you can get back above 372 and hold above there, that should be pretty bullish, okay? With those gaps below you on SPY, I would be a little careful on Qs because you could be pulled down by SPY filling those gaps. It does look like we have filled this gap for the most part. If we do go down to the lower time frames, you can see this gap is pretty much filled, but sadly it's not filled completely. So that still gives them enough reason to sell it off, okay? So early next week, if you pull back to like 366, I wouldn't worry too much. It could just be a gap fill. But if we do hold below 366 or 355, then you could be going down to 361, 360 to fill that lower gap, okay? Moving on to gold, really nothing new here, still maintaining your downtrend. We hit that trend perfectly, failing off of it, failing the 200-day EMA as well. So just showing overall weakness, okay? If it can't get back above this trend as soon as possible, I would look for a break of 1750 down into 1700. If it breaks the trend, then you're looking for around 1840 to 1860. Moving on to crude oil, still maintaining our very strong uptrend. We're actually creating somewhat of a fork off of this trend. So we're creating kind of a stronger trend. But for now, I would keep an eye on that 84 target, keep an eye on the 86 target. It is still maintaining strong momentum, so it could keep climbing without any kind of pullback. But if it does pull back below, like say 81, I would be looking for somewhere around 78 to 76. Kind of pull back to retest that overall trend. Moving on to USD Jpy, still maintaining its uptrend, very strong breakout. I'm actually very surprised that it did not lead Dixie to a strong breakout with it. You can see Dixie's kind of topping out a little bit. Typically, Dixie will follow the USD JPY pair because it's showing a strength in the dollar. But it seems like most of the move on USD JPY is not because the dollar is getting strong, but it's because the yen is getting weak. Okay, so obviously there's a little correlation there. I think it's looking pretty bullish for now, but if it gets back below like 113.50, then you might see a weakness down to like 111, 112. Moving on to Bitcoin, actually looks very similar to USD JPY, funny enough. We actually have this charted out on our other chart. Let's see. And if you guys followed my weekly newsletter, I gave you guys targets around 55.8 and then 60,800. And then the final target was around 63.3. So that final target is damn near the top, almost to the dollar. You missed it by a little bit, but you were not able to climb above that pivot and gain buyers. So for right now, it's looking a little weak. We did pull back below 60,800. And if it stays below this level, you're most likely going to see a pullback to around 57.4 and then maybe even 55.7. Okay. If we can break above that pivot, then it's just pretty much all-time high, and you're just going to continue to break out from there. Okay. If we do break that level, this will basically conclude this retrace here. So the short-term impulse is going to be over, and we're going to have to take a new impulse for our next targets. So what I would do for that is I would either take this low here or this low here. I'm going to take this one because this is the important low. And then we're going to grab it to kind of where it started to stall out. And it started to stall out right around that level at 55.8. So these are going to be our targets moving forward if we do break the pivot. 65.9 and then 72.1. Okay? And then if we go absolutely crazy from there, 74.2 and 82.2. Okay? Let's go back to the chart here for Ethereum. So Ethereum is very similar, but we have not gotten that close to all-time high just yet. But Ethereum, I would do the same thing here. You would grab the low, take it to where it started to stall out a little bit, and these will be our targets moving forward, around 4,200, 4,300, and then 47, 48. Okay? It is pretty bullish as long as you maintain above like 35 to 36. Get below those levels, and you could see a pullback down to the low 3,000s, around 32 to 31. But all right, that was the summary of markets. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you did. We are going to move on to our options and stock watch list. So starting off this week, we're going to look at AMD here. We've been talking about AMD for a little while now. You had a nice little breakout moving into earnings. I do not play earnings, so I think is that 26? Is that next week? No, it's the week after. So you're safe next week, but then the week after you do have earnings. It looks like it wants to get to that pivot around 116. Get above that pivot, you should be getting like 127. Anything bad, like anything with earnings or bad news, if you do get below like 107, you're probably going to go back down to like 100. Moving on to DT. DT looked really good, had a nice breakout. You are pulling back to retest that high now. So if it holds this high on this pullback, this actually looks pretty good to go for a new high into earnings. The only downside is the momentum's a little weak, but it's still climbing. So the momentum is still gaining. If it can stay above 74, I would be looking for a breakout into around 80. Keep an eye on earnings towards the end of the month. UPST, I gave you guys a bunch of targets on this in Discord, and you smashed all of our targets. I think our highest target was either 395 or 400, so that target has been broken. Now, moving forward, I would probably target like 425 because this breakout is so strong. And as long as it pulls back and maintains above 346, you're still bullish short and long term. Moving on to Airbnb, it looks a little toppy here. Best case scenario, it could be like a cup and handle. So if it pulls back to like 165 but then maintains, you could see a break of 178, and then you would be looking for around 185 to 190. TCOM looks pretty good. This is trip.com. You are finally breaking back above the 200 EMA. If you can stay above the 200 EMA here, you should be able to get this little cluster of pivots around 35 to 36. Walgreens had a massive move on earnings. You kind of retraced almost like half the move on Friday, failing that pivot. But if you can get above that pivot, above 52, you should be able to push towards the highs around 54 to 55. So keep an eye on that. Uber is finally looking good. If we zoom out on Uber, you can see that it lost the 200 EMA, and now we are finally reclaiming it. So this little uptrend here, this little bullish channel, looks pretty good as long as we can maintain above this 200 EMA. So keep an eye on this channel. It could be somewhat of a rising wedge. The momentum is getting a little weak. So if we do start to show signs of weakness, break below the 200, break below the trend, then I would be a little worried. But for now, it should be trending up into that pivot around 5180. Moving on to Snow, it finally broke our 325 resistance. Our next target on that is 344. Get above that level, you should start to uptrend all the way into the pivot around 393. This has been one of our biggest plays, biggest call outs in Discord for the past few months. We called this out way back when it broke 112, and all of our local targets were hit. It even hit our final target, so we had to extend our targets. So now our extended targets are 143 and 148. Those have already been hit. Now our next targets are 163 and 168. This is just going completely vertical. As long as it can maintain above like 143, it looks very bullish. You do have earnings coming up towards the end of the month, so be a little careful on that, but keep an eye on those targets. Moving on to PayPal, you bounced beautifully off our 251 pivot. Now you're getting back above the 200 EMA. You do have earnings coming up. I'm holding some long-term shares. We are going to hold through earnings. If it has a really bad reaction to earnings and it gets below like 250, I'll probably think about closing my shares. But for now, we're going to hold them for this move. MGM, one of our best plays so far on the last few weeks. We took these shares around 44.50-ish, and then we had a massive breakup on the, they had an upgrade. I can't remember by which firm, but they were upgraded massively, over 106% upgrade. So our local target is 50, our farther out target is 55. It's looking pretty good. It's in a micro pullback right now, so it's a little choppy. But if you can get above like 49 and hold above 49, it looks pretty strong. Another one that I added to my long-term portfolio, this was actually a recommendation from one of my buddies. This is a company that is based in South Korea. It's basically like the Amazon of South Korea. So I'm going to start accumulating some shares. I bought a bunch of shares on Friday, or I think it might have been Thursday. And then we are selling calls against it because it is a little risky buying shares in a downtrend. So because it's in a downtrend, I'm selling calls against my shares. So we're selling covered calls. Right now, I am selling the $30 calls that expire in November. I believe November. Yep. Coinbase, very strong breakout. Finally starting to test the upper range here. If you can hold above like 290, break above like 290 into 300, this looks really good. Let's take a look at the anchored VWAP from the all-time high. You can see we broke the anchored VWAP from the all-time high, which is also the IPO candle. So if we can maintain above that anchored VWAP, this is just basically straight up from here. We do have earnings coming up in November, but I'm hoping for a nice little breakout, one final impulse up into earnings. Looks pretty good. If you get back below the 273 anchored VWAP, I'd be a little worried. All right, last but not least, big tech. Right now, we are getting very close to all-time high. So if it does break all-time high, the next target would be somewhere around 310, and then I would look for around 314 to 315. Moving on to Apple, you are hitting our 145 target. If you can hold above that, look for the 50-day around 147 to 149. Those would be your next targets. Facebook lost the 200 EMA, bounced off support, now we reclaimed it. Looks like a nice little bull div forming on the Momo. If you can maintain above 330, look for 337 and then 341. If it gets below the 200 EMA, look for 316. Netflix getting a little toppy in earnings. I think we have earnings next week, I believe. Yeah, Tuesday, if TradingView is correct. So I probably would not play this into earnings. But what happens with earnings on Netflix? It almost always gives you a gap play, right? And what does Netflix always do? It always fills its gaps. So the best play here is to wait for earnings, let it make that gap, and then you take the gap fill play afterwards. Most of the time, the gap fill play is best to be taken with shares. Amazon had a massive day on Friday, up 3.3, almost 3.5. Coming into the monthly view app around 34.26. If you can break above that, look for 34.64. And then that would fill the gap. And then above that, you do have a pivot around 34.76. If it gets back below the 50, then I would be looking for like 32.88. Tesla had a massive breakout, finally hit our target at 824. Our next target on that is, let's see, on 862. It is the gap that is right around the all-time high. So keep an eye on like 850 to 862. That should give you a very nice target moving forward. But all right, guys, that is the summary markets and the weekly watch list. One final announcement. The OTG bot, the bot that we've been working on for quite some time now, is finally ready to be launched. We are going to be launching it tomorrow. So make sure you guys keep an eye on my Twitter for more details. I am going to have a promotion going for the first few days. So if you guys would like to test out the bot, it's going to be a pretty big promotion. So keep an eye on my Twitter. We will have more details coming tomorrow. But all right, guys, thanks for watching. Make sure to hit that like button, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace out.